Welcome to Study Session 5, Government Intervention in Literacy Efforts. Introduction. We discussed in the just concluded study session the contributions of Christian missionaries and Muslim scholars to the furtherance of literacy work. We observed also that these religious bodies sought to use their literacy work to win converts, to encourage the converts, and to teach the converts the new ways of life prescribed by the new religions. In this study session, therefore, we will explain the establishment of government interest in literacy. We will also examine colonial government by identifying their efforts in literacy. Finally, we will explain the contributions of government since independence. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to identify the efforts of colonial government and discuss the contributions of government since independence. The missionaries. Various types of missionary bodies and their contributions to literacy will be our focus in this study session, and subsequently, we will be seeing into the efforts of colonial government and the independent government's efforts on literacy. Western-oriented type of literacy education dates back to 1515, when Catholic missionaries set up a school in Oba's palace for his sons and the sons of his chiefs who were converted to Christianity. This was followed by another missionary endeavor of the English-speaking Christian mission, who arrived in Badagry in September 1842, where the first known school, named Nursery of the Infant Church, was established. Within a short time, several missionaries moved into the field to establish schools in different parts of the country. Each mission operated its own educational system and financed its own educational projects from the meager resources available to it because government assistance was yet to start. These Christian bodies felt the literacy scale would give the converts ability to read the Bible, sing hymns, and recite catechisms, and be able to communicate both orally and in writing. The efforts of colonial government. Before the colonial government thought of contributing to the development of literacy, it could be seen from the above that various missionary bodies had contributed immensely to the development of literacy. Schools had been founded, not by the colonial government, but by the various Christian bodies, viz., the Catholic, the Methodist, and the CMS, to mention but few. One may wonder why colonial government intervention in literacy efforts was delayed. The reason was that education was not a priority at that time. Top priorities were roads must be made, swamps filled up, the river banks properly staked and supported to prevent its being washed away. A good prison must be built to guard the prisoners escaping. A hospital must be erected and a powder magazine built, and eventually we shall need some barracks for the place. Nothing has yet been undertaken by government in the way of education, owing to the want of necessary funds. In 1882, the first education ordinance was passed with a view to introduce control and supervision into the educational efforts in British West Africa territories. Even when the colonial administration showed interest in the development of literacy efforts, the approach used was, again, like the one adopted in Britain, that is, the establishment of a dual control of education, with statutory and voluntary bodies sharing the responsibility for the provision and maintenance of schools. During the next 4 years, after the 1882 ordinance, the colony and protectorate of Lagos continued to be administered jointly with the Gold Coast colony. It must be mentioned in passing that the ordinance covered the West African territories of Lagos, the Gold Coast, Sierra Leone, and Gambia. The ordinance provided for a General Board of Education, and it was first of its kind in West Africa. The colonial government took interest in the literary effort because the mission's monopoly of schools was a danger for the government, and if the schools were left in the hands of these missions, the standard of education, which was already not uniform, would become worse if not taken over from them. It is also believed that whosoever controls the school controls the state. The colonial government did not limit its involvement in literacy efforts to the giving of grants, appointment of inspectors and sub-inspectors, but also went to the extent of establishing primary and secondary schools to take out the number of schools founded and funded by the missions. Later in Nigeria, the number of government schools had reached 14, 6 in Western, 8 in the Central, and 16 in the Eastern province. A sizable number of West Indian and African teachers were employed in these schools. Later, the first government secondary school, King's College, was founded in Lagos 1909. The independent government's efforts on literacy education. Before Nigeria became independent in 1960, Nigerian nationalists Awolowo, Azikiwe, Ahmadu Bello, and a host of others had fought tooth and nail to force the colonial masters to introduce a type of education suitable to Nigeria. Emphasis was laid on the need to adapt education to suit local needs because of allegedly unsuitability of West African education in Africa, of Western education in Africa. This awareness made these nationalists raise eyebrows when Higher College, Yaba, was established in 1932. There were hues and cries because the college was considered inferior to a university. Without a doubt, before the staff of Office of Nigeria was given to Nigerians, Nigerians were partners in the contribution to the development of literacy in the country. The hues and cries that heralded the establishment of Yaba College of Technology hastened the establishment of a university college in Nigeria. This marked the beginning of the independent government's efforts to promote literacy in the country. This was followed by the establishment of more schools at primary level. However, the independent government's contribution to literacy education should not be measured by merely the number of established schools. There are other things to consider when commending the activities of this independent government. The curriculum was such that suits the local needs of Nigeria. Schools were so widespread that either to abandoned villages and rural areas had schools of their own for their children. This great move halted for quite a long time urbanization. The courses introduced by the colonial master were thoroughly examined and constructively criticized, and were found unsuitable for the yearnings of the teeming millions of Nigerians. The type of education introduced by the colonial masters was the one that prepared the recipients for job that fitted the colonial administration. African needs education to train Africans for citizenship, to promote enlightened cooperation among the indigenous people and between them and the British officials, and lastly, to assist in character building. There was moral decadence among the Nigerian products of the existing schools in the colonial era. Apart from the criticism of fellow Nigerians, there were also critics like Lord Lugard and Walter Miller, a medical missionary in Nigeria. They were among the whites who criticized the type of literacy education introduced by the colonial master. The need was felt to design a different educational system, curriculum and examination for Nigerians. Steps were taken by the political leaders of the three major parties in Nigeria. For example, in the western region as the division of the country was then known Chief Awolowo, who became the first premier of the region, introduced free compulsory primary education for all children of school age. education became next importance to health, since health is wealth. With this step taken, the way became paved for the children of the poor who had little or no opportunity to enjoy primary education. The East also increased the number of primary schools to enable the state government to absorb more children, while the North, because of the kick against Western-oriented type of education, encouraged Arabic schools, employed more Arabic teachers, and even improved the conditions of locations of such schools. The introduction for secondary modern schools bridged the gap between the primary school leavers and secondary school certificate holders, and the turnout of secondary modern school became feeders of teacher training colleges. Leavers of these colleges were teachers of primary schools, while leavers of secondary modern schools were auxiliary teachers in primary schools. Within a short period of independence, the number of primary schools throughout the country increased, and more secondary schools were established. Trade centers, technical schools, or colleges came into being to cater for those with technical or professional bent. Nigeria was noted for weaving, dyeing, sculpturing, blacksmithing, carving, farming, fishing, cattle rearing, dressmaking, catering, and hair plaiting. These were discouraged during colonial rule, but from time of independence they were reactivated. The reactivation made possible the use of raw materials like palm fronds, animal skin, clays, iron, woods, cotton, and leaves of all sorts for dyeing. These local raw materials were no more lying fallow, but were fully utilized. The use of all this for different professions were taught in trade centers and technical colleges side by side with Western-oriented type of literacy education. Higher institutions. From 1960, when Nigeria attained self-rule, the number of universities has been on the increase. The reasons include the need for manpower, which is an integral part of national development. For example, primary schools were more than double, and teachers were needed to make available such teachers with grade 2 certificates. Teachers should be degree holders to teach in our teachers' colleges and colleges of education. Today, almost each state in the Federation of 30 states has a university of its own apart from federal-owned universities of technologies in many parts of the country. Colleges of education also have increased by leaps and bounds. Some of these colleges have been elevated to the status of degree award institutions to alleviate the increasing burden of universities in the country. As one government succeeded in the other, whether military or civil, each one tried to promote literacy even in a better form than its predecessor had left it. While from what we have discussed so far, attention seems to be on formal school, which is designed for the youth, the federal government has extended its interest to the adults. Today, there is a mass campaign against the eradication of illiteracy and to completely wipe out illiteracy. There should be promotion of adult literacy education, which the present military government is doing as its predecessors had done. Adult literacy education in Nigeria. Between 1952 and 1960, the regional government embarked on policies aimed at developing the education sector, while the Western and Eastern regional government provided universal primary education (UPE). The Northern regional government opted for free primary and adult literacy in its war against ignorance. This sets the tone for adult literacy development in the country during the first 2 decades of post-independence Nigeria. Literacy efforts in Nigeria received a significant boost when UNESCO supported the establishment of an adult literacy institute in 1963 in Ibadan to train professional adult educators. It was established for the promotion and development of literacy education throughout the country. This body worked in collaboration with Nigerian National Council for Adult Education (NNCAE). Within a short period of its establishment, this adult education division of the Federal Ministry of Education has contributed immensely to the development of literacy education for the adults. The division encouraged and sponsored an annual seminar conference of heads of adult education agencies in Nigeria, universities and colleges. It has also assisted state agencies financially in their literacy ventures. The division also worked a 10-year mass campaign in Nigeria. Similar efforts were made at the state level, for example, in Oyo State for adult and non-formal education. It was established by the Executive Council of Oyo State in 1987. This body is to serve as an instrument for the eradication of illiteracy among the adults. The agency's objectives is to organize and carry out literacy programs which include reading, writing, civic education, and numeracy for adults in the state. Within 2 years, the agency had up to 2,000 learning centers in the state and not less than 58,000 people, out of which 28,000 were women, enjoy the adult literacy education. Professionals of all sorts have benefited from the exercise. The weavers, drivers, clothes sellers, and traditional chiefs are some of those who benefited. Study session summary. In this study session, we explain the establishment of government interest in literacy. We also examined colonial government by identifying their efforts in literacy. Finally, we explained the contributions of government since independence. End of study session 5.